Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Today I want to discuss self-hosting and home automation. Home automation is a precarious dance with IoT and EOT. And if you haven't heard the acronym EOT, it stands for the enterprise of things. So home automation has become a conglomeration of protocols including Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Z-Wave, and Zigbee protocols. And honestly, if I thought about it long enough, I could come up with some other protocols as well. So much of IoT is cloud-oriented, and we have no control over the software, the arbitrary changes that the vendors who wrote that software make, and privacy considerations. Most IoT operates inside of proprietary ecosystems like Amazon, Google, and Philips Hue. So what matters? Well, the new Matter protocol is supposed to be a common language that is designed as a way to simplify the interface to all smart home devices. And doesn't that sound great? Well, do you really trust industry standards to fix a lifelong ongoing problem? And which large companies participate in the Matter standard? And will small companies and older IoT devices really be included? Local control and security should be the key in any home automation solution and any home automation architecture. So pick a provider and make them central to your system, and all other devices should be able to be controlled from that particular provider. And again, I wouldn't suggest that that provider be a large cloud-based company like Amazon or Google. So what now? Well, what did I do? You'll notice that I've resisted content related to home automation, and yet I have an extremely automated home. When I thought about starting this channel about 2 years ago, I thought, wow, I'm going to get in and talk about home automation. And in reality, it's such a mixed bag, and there's so many people out there that talk about home automation that I wanted to produce a little bit different spin on it if I ever did talk about it. And so that's what I'm after here today. So there's no right solution, and if anyone tells you that there's a right solution for home automation, then I argue that they're probably not looking at enough solutions. So I have a Habitat Home Elevation Hub as the center of my home automation, and it has integrated radios for both Z-Wave, Z-Wave, and Zigbee protocols. That was a good one. Anyway, I have Z-Wave and Zigbee devices, and there are things like wall switches, and I've got outlets, plugs, relays, motion sensors, and temperature sensors. And again, if I thought about that a little bit more, I'd probably come up with even more devices. So I also have a Philips Hue hub to control our Philips Hue light bulbs, light switches, light strips, and so on. And I have lots of Amazon Echo devices and Google Home Assistants. In fact, in every room I have an Amazon Echo device, and so that's so that I can voice control most of my smart home, and I consider voice to be the easiest method to control a smart home. After all, if you have to pull out a phone and launch an application, that's not very convenient. And before you jump on it, yes, I admit that automation should be things that are automated and not things triggered by the individual person, but there's a use case for both types. So I have Chamberlain MyQ garage door openers as well, and I have both wired and wireless cameras in the house and outside the house, and they are addressed on a separate VLAN. I have smart TVs, Roku, Fire TV 4K sticks, including the Fire Stick 4K Max and the Google Chromecast 4K. The only thing that lends sanity to all of this is the fact that I have local LXD server instances that manage and control all of my devices. So I started out by thinking, well, I'll go ahead and draw myself a diagram with all of my IoT on it, and I'd kind of go over it. And I discovered very quickly that that wasn't going to happen. And in fact, overall, I discovered that if I look at my network, I have around 120 nodes out there. And those 120 systems, the majority of them actually fall on this IoT network. So up here we've got the public internet depicted in a small cloud, and then we have the much bigger Scotti-BYTE network here, which is, of course, larger than the entire public internet put together. And if you believe that, I've got some things for sale here, including some bridges. Right? And remember, bridges are software switches. Okay, so on my main network depicted in black, I've got a couple of PCs, a printer, and a Pi hole. And we've got a whole lot more out there, but I just drew something so I would have a main home network. Then down here depicted in red, I have a dedicated VLAN that I call my Cloud DMZ, and that's where I host all my self-hosted applications in my LXD containers that you hear me discussing on the channel frequently. There are things like my Rocket Chat server at chat.scotti-byte.com, my discourse server at discussion.scotti-byte.com, and my web server at www.scotti-byte.com, along with many other self-hosted applications. But what we want to focus on here are all the things in blue, and trust me, I couldn't come up with enough room in the diagram to put things in blue, so I have actually very little out here. So as I mentioned a little earlier, I have an Amazon Echo basically in every room, and the reason for that is because I wanted my voice assistant to provide a easy method for voice recognition to control all of my automation. And the same thing goes for Google Home. I've got two Google Assistants located in 2 rooms of the house, but really the Amazon Echoes are in the majority of the rooms. And then I have a Philips Hue hub. I only mention it because it's another hub or bridge type device that then goes off and controls a whole plethora of devices. Again, proprietary, but fortunately it functions locally. And then I have a device called the Chamberlain MyQ Bridge. And what that does is that allows the Chamberlain Garage Door application to run from either Android or iOS and control my garage doors. So I had some problems in trying to integrate that, and I worked around that several times, and finally what I ended up doing was just configuring a normal garage door remote wired into it, and put a couple of put some relays in it, and now there is a Zigbee relay that actually controls all of the garage door functions. So arguably you can say that my garage door control is now localized. And that's some of the things I'm talking about when it comes to trying to not rely upon the cloud if you see the possibility to do so. And by the way, I might point out my garage door functions control a lot more reliably now because of that change. And then I have several Reolink cameras located mostly around the outside of the house, and they're all PoE, Power over Ethernet cameras, and those are great cameras. They're inexpensive, they provide fantastic pictures, but they're on this dedicated IoT network because we want to isolate their traffic from the main LAN. And again, I don't know what code is inside them and whether they're going to quote phone home, but rest assured I don't use any of the Reolink cloud services. I actually use all local services to control these Reolink cameras, including RTSP for streaming and recording on my NVR. And so that works out a lot better, reduces traffic on my internet connection as well. And then I have 3 Logitech Harmony hubs, and so I put a block out there called Logitech Harmony Hub. And these are fantastic devices that will allow you to go off and control an entertainment center with multiple peripherals, and I have a lot of automations associated with them. And in fact, I actually have a couple of LexD containers that are operating on this IoT network that perform ancillary control for the Logitech Harmony hubs themselves. And then I put a couple of clouds up here. One cloud is for all the Zigbee switches and sensors that I have, and another cloud is for all the Zigbee or Z-Wave switches and sensors that I have. And there's quite a few Zigbee devices and quite a few Z-Wave devices. They can be wall switches that are wired, they can be wireless switches, they can be temperature sensors, and I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation quite a few of those out there. So basically, every wall switch is a smart switch. Then as we kind of go below the line, because I ran out of room above the line, we've got a Nest thermostat. Again, I have some local control that I've accomplished on that Nest thermostat. I also have a Daikin mini split, and it has a Wi-Fi controller on it in order to control it, and I actually have it automated as well. I have a couple of Rokus. I have a couple of Fire Stick TV 4Ks and one Fire Stick 4K Max. I have a Samsung Smart TV, and I also have a couple of other smart TVs. I have a Samsung refrigerator that has some smarts in it. And I have a Habitat Elevation hub, which I found really helps me with my automations. And that has to do with part of my journey when I got involved in all of this. So I started automation way back in the early 1980s with X10. And believe it or not, I still have one X10 switch on the wall. It's not being used, but I haven't pulled it out and replaced it yet. And it's the only switch that, to my knowledge, isn't automated. So I used the Habitat Elevation, and primarily because for many years I used these smart things, the Samsung Smart Things hub, and Samsung Smart Things started to change and started to restrict the things you could do. And I really wanted to continue to use a lot of that code and use things in more or less the same way. And Habitat Elevation were a group of engineers that broke off from Smart Things. And so they use a lot of the same code, automations, and smart apps. And so therefore, I decided to go off to the Habitat Elevation. And I have a lot of automated apps as well that I've integrated into the home. Some of them call external containers that are running in LexD that accomplish that. Recently, I've also fired up a Home Assistant instance, and my Home Assistant instance is operating on a LexD VM, and the plan is for that Home Assistant to provide some things that Habitat does not provide readily or as easily. And so right now I'm sharing all of my devices that are controlled by the Habitat Elevation out to the Home Assistant. And again, I mentioned make something the core of your network. And so this Habitat Elevation is the core of my automation network. And then I have over here a Monocle gateway. That is an RTP to RTSP bridge. And what it does is it takes the video from my Reolink cameras and offers it back to the Amazon applications so that they can display those cameras on things like the Fire TV sticks or the Echo Shows. I also have multiple Sonos devices. I do have one Nest camera floating around here, and it's there mainly because it plays well with the thermostat and other Nest devices. I have multiple Wyze cameras, and it's interesting because I finally went ahead and replaced the firmware on my Wise cameras with some really basic open source software, and it really increased the functionality of my Wise cameras, so I no longer need to use the Wise app to control the Wise cameras. And then I also have a Google Chromecast 4K, and I have some containers that LXD containers that actually sit out and are relays from the Habitat Elevation over to the Chromecast 4K, so that I can have automations that will display status of the home and so on the Chromecast 4K. And then I have what I call a utility web server. I actually have a couple of these utility web servers that sit out on the IoT network, and they perform functions with my IoT that allow them to do more than they would just do out of the box. And one example of that would be Logitech Harmony hubs. So I do device level control, and normally you can only do control by turning off and on the switches for activities, but I do device level control, and I do that with one of my IoT utility web servers. And then another device I just thought I would mention up here is I have a Primex network time protocol clock. It uses NTP to set the time, and it sits out on the Wi-Fi network, but it's a really nice looking walnut clock that hangs on the wall, but yet it is another piece of IoT. And if you think about it, you have a lot more IoT devices on your network than you can really imagine. So I guess the story behind most of this is pick something as the center of your network. Pick something that you control and that has local control and will still work if your internet service provider connection is down. And also, the other thing that is really key to it is provide something that you know you have control over, so that it won't suddenly go away or change radically one day, causing everything to break. So in summary, and really summary and more stuff, home automation is a complex subject if you do it right. And honestly, it's a more complex subject if you do it wrong. Providers like Amazon say they're making it easy by providing the hub to manage it all. And if you've recently purchased something like the Amazon Echo 4th generation, you know that it has an integrated Zigbee hub. But honestly, do you want everything connected to it, not knowing what the future is for Amazon's home assistant or automation? It seems highly successful now, but what about 5 years down the road? And what happens when a cloud provider goes away? And that's really the point here. If you don't have local control, then you're really not in control of what you're doing. So do we need to make more standards like Matter? Or do we really just need to find ways to configure what we have locally and control what we have locally? What happens when you sell your smart home and move? How many devices are you going to leave behind? And honestly, are you going to leave all your authorizations to these cloud providers, to your cloud accounts as well? And if not, are you really selling a smart home? So focus on solutions that allow you to control your smart home locally so that you can be in control. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. And just so you can see here, I have all of my help in the background that is helping me along with this video, and they have been absolutely marvelous. You can't hardly tell they're there. Right, Sadie? Sadie, what do you think? He doesn't think anything. What about you, Pebbles?